Move it down. One, two, three, 6. Okay, we do have a quorum. I'll call the workshop to order. Also that in accordance with the town's procedure bylaw, no decisions are to be made, but rather this meeting is an opportunity for council to have an informal discussion on various matters. We'll have a PowerPoint presentation in terms of the frameworks, a presentation by Mr. McDougall, and then I'll entertain a motion to go into a closed session so that we can have more detailed discussions regarding the pending our disposition of lands owned by the municipality. Mr. McDougall.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good morning, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Thank you for the opportunity today to speak to you about what will be a lot of information, but exciting information in terms of trying to work towards a strategic direction for the municipality as it relates to framework for future facilities and land use. So I'm going to kick things off this morning with a public presentation. I'm going to walk through some of the information that's helped to inform our workshop today. And then I'm going to turn it over in closed session for a presentation from the Director of Recreation and Culture. There'll also be a few slides presented by the Commissioner of Development Infrastructure Services and the CEO of the library.
One other item that I need to do before we go forward is that, are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? Being none, we'll go forward then.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you.
Sorry, Ian.
No problem. Thank you. So how we arrived at today's presentation, we had a full day facilitated planning meeting. We had an internal facilitator walk some staff through a process. It was on January 29th, involved the CAO, the commissioners, 4 directors representing various areas within the corporation, and then 6 staff. And it was a full day, very productive day. At that time, we discussed options for each facility type and landed on some options and some preferred locations that had some land implications. So we considered with that land implications, timing, the order, and of course some potential financing thoughts as well. So why we are doing this is that there really are a lot of wide impacting long-term strategic decisions and directions, pending and upcoming that do relate to land and facilities related to that land and community development. So there's a lot of moving parts right now, so this is intended to help create a consistent path for all of us. So this workshop, and I'd like to point out as well, the follow-up report that will be a public report and public engagement process will help to support transitioning policy documents from policy documents to action plans. And I think that's very important that we have a very good recreation playbook. The community is excited about it. We're all excited about what it contains. Now we have to move it from policy to action and have a plan as to how we can do that. As well, to take this, what I'll call a roadmap, and to support both our current and our future decision making. And then to help council and the community arrive at a shared understanding of this roadmap so that everybody is clear on where we're trying to go and how we're going to try and get there. So the scope for today, there's 4 different types of facilities that are going to be referenced. There's recreation and culture facilities, those specifically related to the recreation playbook, and that will be the vast majority of the conversation, I believe, today in the workshop. As well, there are some references to public works, operations, and support facilities, municipal offices, as well as the Newmarket Public Library. So the key considerations that we went through and that we'll speak about today will be around service levels and council philosophy, funding and financing, and then as well land and timing. So as it relates to council's philosophy and service levels, within the recreation playbook there are a number of facilities. I won't go through all of these, but there's a number of facilities that are referenced that speak to an expanded level of service And then as well, a lot of that is linked back with development charges and opportunities there. But there's a listing of facilities you'll see there that are referenced within the playbook. So a few assumptions that we go into today with. One is that Council wishes to maintain the current service levels for items not discussed today and or listed in the Recreation Playbook. So our service levels are such that Council and the community are pleased with. For those that are referenced within, the Council will consider an enhanced level of service when aligned with strategic policy documents, so for instance the playbook, and subject to funding, land, and appropriate timing. And of course that would always be linked through the budget process, so Council has that opportunity to discuss, debate, engage the public, and look at the budget decisions accordingly. And finally, as well, as Newmarket prepares for intensification, existing land, town-owned land, may serve higher purposes. We are in a very unique situation in Newmarket, approaching build-out, where land is of incredible value, and so our own municipal lands are no different in terms of how best to utilize those lands, and if partnerships could be an option in other instances as well. There may be value to that. In terms of funding and financing, so there are a number of different sources, so just very quickly, there's development charges, potential sale of land, there's asset replacement fund, tax supported capital, future revenues that could be generated, donations and sponsorships, and of course public-private partnerships are also an option. Specific to development charges, just a few high-level points on those. They're for all new assets supporting growth, and that's the key point there. It needs to be related to growth, and up to 90% of total costs can be funded through DCs for those things that are related to recreation projects. So the remaining 10% would be a responsibility of the municipality. Now they can't be used to replace an existing asset, so it all has to be linked back to growth and growing, responding to a growing community. Now they are collected for indoor recreation, outdoor recreation, and for libraries. And the DCs collected for indoor recreation cannot be used on outdoor recreation. So there are, I'll call them buckets. There's buckets for indoor recreation and there's a bucket for outdoor recreation. There is some flexibility within each of those, but you can't, really be shifting funds from indoor and outdoor. And as well, to the greatest extent possible, we strive to keep with the spirit of what's contained within the development charges, because that's what we also engage the development community on. In 2014, the latest DC study that was completed by Hempson, as Council would recall, it includes $14.1 million net funding envelope for indoor recreation, and we've got a net funding envelope for outdoor recreation of $12.3 million. And then as well for library, there's a $2.4 million in net funding envelope available as well. You'll see there as well that there are some of those funds that are already in reserves. So specific to land, staff's reviewed and has taken into account the utilization of current town land, the need to acquire additional land, potential disposition of current town land, and potential repurposing of the current town land. Specific to future parkland and public space, it's important to point out that this workshop today speaks to future parkland and public spaces in general terms only. It's not intended to determine future park needs. That we think is better served through other discussions at other times. We have a broad enough scope today, other than to say that supporting green space and breathing spaces, particularly along the corridors, remains the utmost important to maintaining a vibrant community, and that there are a few parkland related considerations that linked with specific items within the presentation. So for timing of all of this, we've used for the exercise a 10-year window of planning, and that does coincidentally align with the timing within the playbook. And then all the items we've looked at, we've basically looked at it in terms of smaller windows of time, where there's a 1 to 3 year window, a 4 to 6, and a 7 to 10 year window used. So again, as I mentioned earlier, the Recreation Playbook will form a lot of the discussions in the workshop, but as well, there are other areas that will be discussed and explored and talked about. But as it relates to the playbook, There's a section within the playbook, and all members of council, staff, and the public all have a copy of the playbook available to them today. And within that section, it's entitled the Facility Improvements and Development section. So that's really where it talks around capital facilities. And within that section, there's 65% of the items within that section that are being addressed today to be discussed in the workshop. The remaining 35% not addressed today, they're either already achieved or in progress of being achieved. So you see some of the things listed there, the natural ice rinks, the pools, fitness center, additional shared use school arrangement consideration, you know, and some other things. So in other words, we've got 100% of that section between what's already being addressed and those things being discussed today being covered off. I won't go through all of these. There is a list as well that's on one page for council as a quick reference, and Colin will explain when he gets into his slides around the linkage with council strategic priorities. But I would wanted to just list them here. So there's 14 council strategic priorities, and you'll see them listed here. And again, they're all summarized on one pager for you for quick reference. Of course, everything we do, we want to link back to council strategic priorities to the greatest extent possible. So some other informing strategic documents and ongoing processes for us. Today, there's a secondary plan, of course. There's the Community Center Lands Task Force. There's development charges, and there's other policy documents, things like the Park Policy Manual and other things. On the screen there is the rationale in terms of the closed session portion of the workshop today. So I won't read that off, but there's the reference to the Municipal Act and the rationale for the closed session portion. Again, I would point out though that within that as with all council workshops, there won't be any direction or decisions being made. It's really just to have a discussion, and then as it relates to where we're going to take that discussion, what we're suggesting in terms of key milestones following today is that we've got the council educational workshop today, where there's an open and a closed portion, and then we would envision a staff report that would come out of the conversations that happened today, open and then closed as necessary, but staff reports that would come to committee of the whole that we would suggest will contain recommendations at that time around engaging the public, and having a public engagement process. And then as we complete the loop, as initiatives or projects would be coming forward and looking for concrete council direction, we'd be looking at budget and capital recommendations and planning. That would be on an ongoing basis out of, that all starts with today's workshop. So that concludes the presentation. So I would be pleased to entertain any questions, or I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Mayor.
Any questions with respect to the overall framework, without getting into the specifics of any projects? There's still an opportunity as well for declarations of pecuniary interest. There being none. Okay, thank you. Regional Councillor, questions?
Thanks very much. Just two quick questions. I think it's, I don't know if it's slide 15, but development charges. Just remind me, the information you provided, the last point in the slide, what time period does that encompass?
Yeah, so the time period for the DC study, so 2014?
Yeah.
Okay. Perhaps I could ask Mr. Mays, he probably would be most familiar with the DC.
I mean, I know they get updated 5 years, but I believe the financial projections can go beyond on that, or maybe I'm wrong, but anyway, yeah. And in other words, do you get what I mean, Mr. Mays, or I can expand?
Yep.
He looks confused.
What's the cash
Through
flow?
you, Mr. Chair, perhaps we could get clarification on.
Sure, yeah. So what I'm wondering is, when we say it identified 14.1 million for indoor recreation, that obviously doesn't mean for eternity. So does that mean over the span of the DC study, over 10 years, over?
Okay, yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. The DC background study generally covers a 10-year period. Though it has to be renewed every 5 years, you take it to a 5 years beyond that. So that would contemplate $14.1 million in that example of being spent over the next 10 years, starting in 2014.
Perfect, that's what I was wondering. Okay, and then the other question I had was, I didn't see a reference to, and well, I know it doesn't speak specifically to a type of entity like a pickleball court, there may be needs for considerations of land, and we don't refer to parkland dedication. Is that not a part of a funding consideration?
Yeah, actually, I believe it would be as well, that there is the parkland consideration there's the one slide that does list the options and, right there. That's right, there is the cash in lieu as well, that should be on there.
And that could play,
Yeah.
depending on what kind of decisions are made eventually, that could play a significant role
Correct.
in funding. So I think at whatever point, a little more information on. I mean, we've had some before, and just to get refreshed on it, I recall we've had some information on kind of the scope, but not unlike the final piece on the DCs there. Just to remind us of what we're dealing with there. Thank you. Okay, thanks.
Okay, any additional questions? There being none, then I'll request a motion then to go into a closed session in order that we can discuss proposed or pending acquisition and disposition of land by the municipality as per section 2392C of the Municipal Act.
I'll move it.
Regional Councillor, Councillor Broom-Plumley, all those in favor? That is carried. Okay.